Howdy friends, welcome back. Today we are going to make gluten-free oatmeal, oat flour, apple cinnamon muffins. Man, I made these the other day and they were good. They were flaky, or not flaky, they were moist, right? Spongy, really good consistency, excellent flavor, great texture, easy to make. And what is gluten is like the evil thing these days, people trying to avoid it. So you don't need to use flour, we're gonna use oat flour. We're actually going to make our own oat flour with rolled oats, which is very easy to do. And I'll tell you about a couple other components going in here. I'm going to go over the ingredients and what they're going to be doing. Okay, let's make oat flour. How do we do that? Now, if you're trying to be gluten-free and you want to use oat flour, you go to the store. Oat flour is pretty expensive for what it is. Oat flour is just oats. All that's happening is they're taking the oats and grinding it down into a flour consistency. That's all it really is. So you can do it at home if you have a high-speed blender. I have one of those Ninjas that'll, it's got like a 35 horsepower engine. The thing can fly an airplane. But when you use it to chop this up into a fine powder, and that'll be our flour base. I've been using it in a lot of cooking. I prefer oat flour over regular flour because of the consistency and the taste. It has a rich flavor. Flour tastes like flour. Oat tastes good. It's like oat cookie. It's tasty. So I like using it in my cooking. So I'm going to grind this down to a powder, and that's going to be our base. Hey, look at that. Flour out of oats. Much cheaper than what they have in the store. Look at this. See? Beautiful. We ground all those oats down. I'll sift it a little, but there you go. So 2 cups of oats ground down to flour. Okay, for my batter mixture, I'm going to add a little bit of sweetener, maybe a half a cup of sugar or whatever sweetener you want to use. Honey or some other kind of no-calorie sweetener would be fine to use in this. I put about a tablespoon of cinnamon. I like the cinnamon flavor. You can really add other spices if you want, maybe a pinch of cloves or ginger, but I'm going to keep this simple, and I'm just going to add about a tablespoon of cinnamon, a tablespoon of baking powder, about a tablespoon or 2 of this vanilla. Again, I like that vanilla flavor, plus is that cheap imitation stuff instead of the good stuff. About a cup of milk, maybe a cup and a half. We're going to see what the consistency looks like. And my eggs. So I'll add about two eggs or so. Now, that's a lot of eggs in there. Those are actually quail eggs. They're kind of tiny. So 2 or 3 of these. I think 3 of these equals about 1 chicken egg. So that's why you see so many in there. All right, now, before I do that, baking lesson. If you haven't been baking before, I'm going to tell you what this baking powder is for. Okay, quick lesson. If you haven't baked before, we're going to do 2 types of bread. Leavened bread, unleavened bread. What's leavened bread? Well, it's bread that got leavened. It rises. Unleavened bread is an unrising bread, obviously. So the 2 main ways we make bread rise is through a gas process. You're going to introduce gas to the mixture, and it's going to fill out. So how do you do that? Well, like regular bread, you can use yeast. So yeast ferments, and when the little yeast critters are in there eating the sugar, they produce carbon dioxide, these little tiny, tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide. So that's why you're seeing that bread rise, and you push it down, you'll hear the gas come out. Well, it's the same thing with a baking powder, but it's not a microorganism, and there is some difference in the consistencies of the bread. So with baking powder, how does this work? It's an acid and it's a base. Just like those little volcano experiments back in elementary school. The 2 mix and they produce carbon dioxide and it'll expand. Now it's good to use baking powder in these muffins because they're smaller breads, they're not as much volume and weight, so that gas really isn't pushing too much. Now these are called double acting baking powders. Chemical reaction occurs 1, when you introduce fluid and they mix together, and then 2, once they get to baking heat. So they're going to have two rising processes. They're going to produce carbon dioxide when they mix, and then again in the oven when they get heated. So if you take a look at your muffins while they're cooking, you're going to see them rise, and that's what's happening with this baking powder. Before I mix all this stuff together, I'm going to add my dry ingredients. So my baking powder, like I said, about a tablespoon, maybe a little more. Tablespoon or so of cinnamon. and about a half cup of sugar. Now, when you cook a lot, you never say anything precise. You're always like, about, maybe, I don't know, maybe this. And if you want, I'm not going to add salt to this. You can add salt. It's going to give it a little more flavor, but, you know, cutting out the sodium. So just mix it up thoroughly before you put in your wet ingredients. And we need to prep our apple. This is going to be an apple cinnamon muffin. For the 2 cups of oat flour, 1 apple should be plenty. So take your apple, peel it, chop it, and get it to look like this. Toss them in a pan, add a little piece of butter, sprinkle some cinnamon, water, and give them a little mix. Throw them on the stove at a medium heat. Once they start simmering, cover them up and come back and turn them over every 30 seconds, maybe a minute. You're only going to cook these about 4 minutes, 3 minutes. You just want to get them soft. Now, once your apples are done, you're going to let them cool for a little bit. Remember I was talking about that baking powder double acting with the heat? Well, if you put them when they're real hot, you're going to make that baking powder act again before it goes in the oven. We don't like that. So let these things cool down. Time for wet ingredients. Like I said, about a tablespoon of vanilla. A little bit more. I like vanilla. Throw in your eggs and your cup of milk. And I want to show you the consistency that I like to get. Add my apples, mix them in, about done. Now you see the consistency, it's very fluid. So the reason I do this way, sometimes I won't add as much milk if I want them cakier. Depending on how cakey you want these muffins to come out. I want these to be a little bit moister and a little heavier. So I add a cup of milk. Otherwise, I might add a half. So, depend on the consistency you want, but you always want to experiment and see what works for you. And now all we're going to do is add them to the pans, throw them in our oven that's been preheated to 350, and cook them for about half hour, 35 minutes. You're going to take your muffin sheet. Now, you can use a pan liner, those little cupcake things, or as you can tell, since mine's filthy dirty, I never really use those. I just spray them with a little non-stick spray, so things are all stained up. Stick them in the oven for about 35 minutes. And now they're done. I'm gonna let these sit here and cool for a little bit, but look at that. They tasty. So there you go. I mean, very easy thing to make. Really good. Look at this. Break that open. Does that not look tasty? Wow. That's a good ass muffin. And there you go, kids. Easy to make oat flour muffins. Remember, turn this into flour. Easy to do, gluten-free. You know, don't spend a fortune on this stuff. And experiment in the kitchen. I highly encourage you to go and, you know, try different spices, try different flavors in your food. It's just a skill. You learn how to do these things. Just practice. Alrighty, I guess I'll see you next time. Let me know if you tried making these things. If you have any questions about how to bake. I am a grandmother, apparently, and I bake often, so put them down in the comment area or send me a message. Either way works. Have fun with your muffin making. It's getting into fat season. Winter time and fall. Good time to be cooking these muffins. It'll heat the house up a little bit too. All right, gang. See ya.